What's up, everyone out there in YouTube world, Facebook world, social media world, the world? Welcome to another episode of Music with MGL. I am your host, as always, MGL. Today's topic, we got some breaking news here. I'm going to talk real quickly about what's going on in the Alec Baldwin case. So this is kind of breaking news. It's hot off the presses. It's the 20th of April. So just in the last few hours, the news kind of broke. So I thought I'd do a quick little video on it and an update for everybody. So as always, if you like what I have to say, like a share, like a share, like a share. Subscribe, please, because I'm at 903 or something subscribers, and it'd be cool to get to 1,000 sometime here in the next couple months. So if you like what you see, subscribe. But here we go. Surprise, surprise. Prosecutors dismissing charges against Alec Baldwin in Rust shooting. So as you know, Alec Baldwin shot and killed a woman on the set of a movie he was filming called Rust. That was, I don't know, going on over a year or so ago now. At one point he was charged, and everybody was like, oh, good, he's finally charged. And then guess what? Today they decided to drop the charges. So this is coming to you from CNN. I know it's CNN, but it's being reported everywhere else, and it's just the easiest, quickest article I could find. And it's actually got the funniest quotes as it relates to why these charges were dropped. So here we go. Involuntary manslaughter charges will be dismissed against actor Alec Baldwin, according to a statement from the New Mexico special prosecutors overseeing the case in the Rust shooting. Citing new facts in no quote, I always love that, new facts in the case. Special prosecutors Kerry Morrissey and Jason Lewis said they could not proceed under the current time constraints and on the facts and evidence turned over by law enforcement in its existing form. We therefore will be dismissing the involuntary manslaughter charges against Mr. Baldwin to conduct further investigation, their statement continued. The decision does not absolve Mr. Baldwin of criminal culpability and charges may be refiled. The prosecutors added that their follow-up investigation will remain active and ongoing. Now here comes the interesting part for those of us in the gun community. The decision to dismiss charges against Baldwin is being made after new evidence came to the attention of investigators indicating the gun used in the shooting had been modified, a source familiar with the investigation told CNN. Investigators will be examining the weapon to determine the extent of the modifications which could have impacted how the gun functioned, the source said. So, here's what's interesting about that situation there. So here's what they're claiming. They're claiming that they filed charges against him. They did this long investigation, interviewed everybody, and they should have had the firearm too, by the way. So they would have gone over the firearm. They went to a grand jury or whatever, and then they decided to charge him with these very serious charges. Now, sometime later, they have decided that the gun was, quote, modified, and now they can't prove the charges. Here's a couple issues I have with that. As I've said before, and most of you know, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I only practice in Florida, so I'm familiar with how it works down here where I practice at. That's not usually how prosecutions work in a case like this. I will say that there are numerous cases where the state attorney's office gets a case and they get their own set of facts because it only comes from law enforcement or people who investigated it, and then they file charges. And then you go out and you hire a defense attorney, and the defense attorney does have additional information that the state attorney's office or law enforcement didn't bother to get, or information that only the defendant had access to. For example, like an alibi witness or something like that. If the cops don't try and track those people down, or they never interview the defendant to get his side of the story, or if the defendant wisely says, I'm taking the fifth and I'm not telling you any information, then there may be some facts out there that the state attorney's office or the prosecutor's office and cops don't know about because they're only in the possession of the defendant. And again, lots of times there's stuff out there that they didn't bother to check. For example, let's say something allegedly happens in a parking lot. If they don't bother to go get the surveillance camera from the store or the parking lot, they don't have it, but they arrest the person because these people over here said that the person did it, and then the defense attorney will subpoena and go get the video and send it to the state and say, no, this video says that what your alleged victim and witnesses said is not true, and then they may dismiss it because they didn't have that evidence. So it does happen lots of times that prosecutors will file charges and then defense attorneys will provide additional information that they didn't know about, and it certainly changes the facts of the case and the perspective and everything else. Why I'm highly suspicious about that happening here is because the type of case that it is. What I'm describing are cases where Joe Nobody gets charged with something, and so the cops really don't hardly do an investigation, and the prosecutor just files things off the paperwork that comes from law enforcement, and they don't really conduct an investigation. And then it's up to the defense attorney to basically do the state's job by doing the investigation, because that's a nobody off the street they don't care about. In this particular case, there is no way in hell they didn't conduct a full investigation before they decided to file these charges. They would have interviewed everybody. They would have pulled every piece of footage that happened. And they had the gun, and there's no doubt in my mind that they would have had that gun tested to see if there were any modifications on it. You don't charge somebody with manslaughter for shooting a prop gun and killing somebody if you don't take that gun apart and basically see how it works and see what happened, especially when the guy was on record in an interview saying that the gun fired all by itself. Like, that's been his defense from day one, that the gun fired all by itself. So you're going to obviously do as many tests as you can do on that gun to prove that it wasn't modified to fire on itself. So I find it hard to believe that in this particular case, given the high profile nature of it, that there is no way that they discovered something new that they didn't know before they filed these charges. So I don't know what's going on here. You know, some people might say that they were paid off. The prosecutor's office was paid off or something. I don't know what's going on here. Lots of times things change when different prosecutors come in. So lots of times you'll have one prosecutor that files a charge and then they either quit, or it's an election and they lose and another prosecutor comes in and they kind of give it a fresh set of eyes, and they might say, yeah, this charge never should have been filed in the first place. You also have the reverse of that. If you look at what just happened with Trump, you had the previous prosecutor in New York say, there's no charges here, I'm not filing anything. Another guy gets elected and come in and he says, well, I am going to file something. And so he overrides the previous decision because he's the new guy. So sometimes you will see that. That's not what happened here. There was no change in prosecutors. There was no change in leadership or elected officials there. It's the same people who filed these charges just, 5 or 6 months ago, all of a sudden saying there's new evidence that the gun was modified, so we have to drop all these charges. I'm sorry, that's bullshit, because there was no new evidence that they shouldn't have known about if they did the investigation properly, which they should have done, and I think did in this particular case. In addition, what modification could there be that changes the charges here? The position is that he had the firearm. He didn't conduct proper safety. He didn't check to make sure it wasn't loaded. He didn't check the ammo. He was goofing around with it, pulling it, pointing at people. He's also the executive producer on the movie set, who is partially responsible for hiring the armorer, who did a crappy job with the armory stuff. So whether this gun was modified or not, it changes absolutely nothing about what their theory of the case was. And you can't modify a gun to shoot by itself. We all know that. Like, there's no modification on a planet that you can make that can result in a gun firing by itself. So I don't find this excuse plausible at all. I don't know what's going on here. Maybe the charges never should have been filed in the first place, and they were just overzealous, and then they decided to change their mind later on. Maybe the victim's family got paid off, and they said they don't want to go forward anymore, so they want them to drop the charges. I don't know what's going on. Maybe they got political pressure. I have no idea what's going on, but I find their explanation that they found, quote, new evidence in a case of this high profile, and the evidence being a modification of a firearm, which they should have torn apart from day one to figure out how that firearm was configured, is beyond me. Not to mention the fact that the armorer, they didn't drop her charges. She's still being charged with this under the same basic theory that Alec Baldwin was being charged with it, yet his charges got dropped and hers are currently still pending. So the whole thing is kind of weird, but there you go. That's the updated news on the Alec Baldwin situation. That's my take on it. We'll see what happens on it. They claim that, it's an ongoing investigation and charges will be refiled, but I would find it really implausible that could happen, because I've never seen a case that was filed, new evidence was presented that made it dismissed, and then new evidence is going to come up to negate the new evidence so they can refile it again. I mean, this case is over, basically. There's no way they're going to charge him with anything at this particular point. So there you go. So he's going to get away with it, in my opinion, for what was going on here. Whether you agree with the facts of the case or not, they've been dropped. So there you go. That's my update on it. That's my thoughts on it. So as always, like, share, subscribe to the channel. Comment down below if you have any questions or thoughts on it. I'd love to hear what other people think about this. But I'm going to end it here. So thanks for watching as always. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay vigilant, and as always, carry on.